Lily also noticed. She stayed close to Marco like a guard even though she was his sister and not trained for danger. She tried to speak gently to him. "Marco, you're going to embarrass yourself," she whispered. Marco laughed bitterly and leaned closer to her. "Embarrass myself?" he said. "That's funny. Ava didn't mind embarrassing me when she walked away." Lily's heart dropped. She could hear the pain in his voice. She could also hear the anger, but not the kind of anger that wanted revenge. It was the kind of anger that came from feeling helpless. Lily shook her head and said softly, "She didn't do it to hurt you." Marco stared at her with eyes that looked darker than usual. "Everyone leaves me," he said like it was a fact he had learned from life. Lily's face softened. She reached out and touched his arm again, trying to ground him. "I'm not leaving," she told him. "I'm here." Marco blinked slowly. For a moment, he looked confused, as if he didn't understand what real loyalty felt like. Lily had always been loyal, but Marco had been so busy fighting the world that he forgot what family support really meant. He looked at Lily like she was the only person in the room who was not fake. And in a strange way she was. Everyone else at the party had a reason for their smiles. They wanted money, influence, connections, or gossip. Lily wanted nothing. She was only there because she cared about her brother. That pure truth hit Marco hard, and the alcohol made it hit even harder. Around them, the party continued like a play. The band switched to a faster song. People began dancing, and the room filled with movement. A group of reporters stood near the stage, pretending to be guests while taking pictures. A businessman's wife laughed loudly, her cheeks pink from champagne. Two young men whispered while watching Marco, clearly enjoying the drama. Grace felt her stomach tighten. She knew how quickly a small moment could become a scandal. She also knew the DeLuca name was already surrounded by rumors. People wanted proof that Marco was unstable, that the family was dangerous, that the charity was just a cover. Tonight was giving them exactly what they wanted. Marco ordered another drink. Lily tried to stop him, but he was taller and stronger, and he moved like he didn't even feel her hand on his wrist. He drank, then leaned against the bar for a second, his eyes scanning the room. He saw couples laughing. He saw men holding their wives' hands. He saw a young woman kissing her boyfriend's cheek. All of it reminded him of Ava. It reminded him of the normal life he could never fully have. The sadness inside him grew like a storm. Marco was not just grieving Ava. He was grieving the dream of being normal. He was grieving the hope that he could escape his own identity. And because he could not fight that pain directly, he looked for the easiest way to silence it. Lily pulled him away from the bar and guided him toward a quieter corner near a tall curtain. "Marco, listen to me," she said firmly. "You need water. You need to breathe. You're not thinking clearly." Marco looked down at her, and for a second he smiled in a strange way. It was not a happy smile. It was a broken smile, the kind you see on someone who is trying not to cry. "You sound like Ava," he said. Lily frowned. "No," she replied. "I sound like your sister." Marco's smile disappeared. His eyes looked wet, and Lily realized he was close to tears. She had never seen her brother like this in public. It scared her. Then something happened that Lily did not expect. Marco reached out and gently held her face, like he was trying to memorize her expression. Lily froze. She thought he might hug her, or maybe he was about to whisper something emotional. But Marco's next move was sudden and wrong. In a drunken, confused moment, he pulled Lily toward him and kissed her. The kiss was not long. It was not passionate. It was not romantic. It was messy, desperate, and filled with pain. It was the action of a man who had lost the person he loved and grabbed the nearest person who felt safe. But the room did not see it that way. People did not see Marco's heartbreak. They did not see his grief. They only saw a powerful man kissing his sister in public, and the shock spread through the ballroom like fire. For 1 second, the entire room seemed to freeze. The band continued playing, but the sound felt far away. A woman gasped loudly. Someone dropped a glass and it shattered on the floor. A few people laughed nervously, unsure if it was a joke. Others stared with wide eyes. Several phones immediately lifted into the air, recording. The reporters didn't even pretend anymore. They moved closer, hungry for a story. Grace's face turned pale. She stepped forward quickly, but it was too late. The moment had already happened, and the room had already witnessed it. Lily pushed Marco back with both hands. Her eyes were wide with disbelief and anger. "What are you doing?" she hissed, trying to keep her voice low, but her shock made it impossible. Marco stumbled back slightly, and the alcohol fog lifted just enough for him to understand where he was. His face changed from confusion to horror. He looked at Lily, then looked around at the staring crowd, and then his eyes fell to the phones pointed at him. Marco's heart dropped. He felt sick. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked like a man who had just woken up inside someone else's nightmare. Lily, I didn't. Marco tried to speak, but his voice broke. Lily's face was red, and her hands were shaking. You kissed me, she said, her voice trembling with humiliation. In front of everyone. Marco took a step toward her, but Lily stepped back. She didn't want him close. She didn't want his touch. Not because she believed he wanted her in a romantic way, but because the act itself was a betrayal of trust. Lily had come tonight to support him. She had stood beside him when the world judged him. And now he had turned her into the center of a scandal. Grace finally reached them. She placed herself between Marco and the crowd like a shield. Her voice was calm but urgent. We need to leave. Now, she said. Marco stared at her like he didn't understand. Grace repeated, Boss, move? Marco's body obeyed automatically, like he was trained to follow orders in crisis. He turned and walked toward the exit, but every step felt heavy. The whispers followed him. The stares followed him. The cameras followed him. Behind him, Lily stood frozen, unable to move, her chest rising and falling quickly as if she couldn't breathe. She looked around and saw faces full of judgment, curiosity, and excitement. She wanted to disappear. As Marco and Grace moved through the ballroom, people began talking loudly again, like the silence had broken. But the mood had changed completely. The party was no longer about charity. It was about scandal. It was about the DeLuca family drama. It was about the moment everyone would discuss for weeks. Someone whispered the words that would soon become the headline everywhere. After his breakup, the Mafia boss, in a drunken state, kissed his sister, and caused a sensation at the party. It was already turning into a story, and the worst part was that Marco could not erase it. He could not threaten the internet. He could not buy back a moment. He could not control what people had seen. Outside, the cold air hit Marco's face. The night felt sharp and cruel. Grace pushed him toward the car. Marco's hands were shaking, and he looked like he might throw up. He leaned against the car door and whispered, What did I do? Grace didn't answer because there was no answer that could fix it. Lily came out a few seconds later, her face stiff with anger and pain. She didn't look at Marco. She didn't speak. She just got into the car and stared out the window like she was somewhere far away. Marco sat beside her, but the space between them felt like a wall. He wanted to apologize, to explain, to say he was broken and drunk and not himself. But even he knew it sounded weak. The truth was simple. He had crossed a line, and he had done it in front of the world. As the car drove away from the hotel, Marco stared at the city lights passing by. His mind was spinning. He thought about Ava. He thought about Lily. He thought about the cameras. He thought about the rumors that would spread. He thought about how his name, which he worked so hard to protect, was now covered in shame. And for the first time in his life, Marco DeLuca realized something terrifying. He could handle enemies. He could handle violence. He could handle betrayal. But he did not know how to handle himself when his heart was broken. The next morning, Marco woke up on his living room couch with his head pounding like someone was hitting it with a hammer. His mouth was dry, his stomach felt sick, and his body was heavy as if he had not slept at all. For a few seconds, he didn't remember where he was or why he was lying on the couch instead of his bed. The sunlight coming through the tall windows was too bright, and the silence in the penthouse felt strange. Marco closed his eyes again, hoping the pain would go away. But then, like a knife, the memory returned. The party. The lights. The music. The stairs. Lily's face. The kiss. Marco's eyes opened quickly, and his heart started beating fast. He sat up, breathing hard as if he had just survived an accident. He put his hands on his face and stayed like that for a long moment, trying to convince himself it was a nightmare. But he knew it wasn't. His body remembered the shame too clearly. Marco slowly looked around. The penthouse looked perfect as always, clean and expensive, like nothing bad had ever happened inside it. But Marco knew his life was no longer perfect. He heard soft footsteps and turned his head. Grace was standing near the window, holding her phone. She looked calm on the outside, but her eyes were tired, and Marco could tell she had been awake for hours. Grace didn't say anything at first. She simply watched him, waiting for him to speak. Marco swallowed hard and asked, "Tell me it wasn't real." His voice sounded rough and weak. Grace did not hesitate. She said, "It was real." Marco closed his eyes again. His stomach twisted. He whispered, "I ruined everything." Grace took a step closer. She wasn't the kind of person who gave long emotional speeches, but she also wasn't cruel. She said quietly, The video is online. It's spreading fast. People are sharing it everywhere. Marco opened his eyes and stared at her. How bad? He asked. Grace looked at her phone and hesitated. Very bad, she said honestly. Some people think it was a joke. Some think you were trying to create attention. But most people are calling you disgusting. They're saying you're unstable. They're saying the DeLuca family is worse than everyone believed. Marco's hands started shaking. He stood up too fast and the room spun for a second. He grabbed the back of the couch to steady himself. Where's Lily? He asked. Grace's expression changed slightly. She looked uncomfortable. She went home last night, Grace said. She won't answer my calls. She won't answer anyone. Marco felt a deep panic. Lily was not just his sister. She was the only person in his family who still lived a clean life. She was the only one who looked at him like he was still human. If he lost her trust, he would lose the last good thing he had. Marco grabbed his phone with shaking hands and called Lily. It rang and rang. No answer. He tried again. Nothing. He sent a text message. Lily, please? I need to talk. I'm sorry. No reply came. Marco's chest felt tight. For the first time in years, Marco felt fear that had nothing to do with enemies. He felt fear of losing someone who truly mattered. Grace watched him carefully. Boss, she said, you need to be smart. The city is watching you right now. If you go outside, reporters will follow you. Marco didn't care. He didn't even look at her. He said, I'm going to her. Grace sighed. She knew stopping him would only make things worse. She made a quick call to the driver and told security to prepare. 10 minutes later, Marco was in the car, wearing a simple dark coat and sunglasses, even though the sun was not that strong. He felt ridiculous, like a criminal hiding from cameras. But in a way he was hiding. Not from the police but from shame. As the car drove through the city, Marco saw his world differently. Normally he looked at streets and buildings like a king looking at his territory. Today he looked at everything like a man who had lost his place. He imagined people whispering his name. He imagined strangers laughing at him. He imagined Ava seeing the video. That thought was the worst. Ava had left him because she feared his life, and now the whole city had proof that he was dangerous in a different way. Dangerous because he couldn't control himself. Marco felt sick again. He leaned back in the seat and pressed his fingers to his temples. He kept thinking, why did I do that? Why did I touch her? Why didn't I stop? The answer was painful, because he was drunk, broken, and desperate. But that explanation didn't fix anything. It didn't undo the moment. It didn't erase Lily's humiliation. When the car finally reached Lily's apartment building, Marco told the driver to park in the back so they wouldn't be seen easily. Grace stayed in the car, giving Marco space. Marco walked up the stairs alone. His step felt heavy. He stood in front of Lily's door and raised his hand to knock, but for a second he froze. He had faced men with guns, but this felt harder. Because if Lily didn't forgive him, he would deserve it. Marco knocked softly. No answer. He knocked again, a little louder. Finally, after a long pause, the door opened. Lily stood there in a simple sweater and jeans. Her hair was tied back and her face looked pale. Her eyes were red, like she had cried during the night. She didn't look angry in a loud way. She looked hurt in a quiet way, which was worse. Marco's throat tightened. He whispered, Lily? Lily didn't invite him in. She didn't smile. She just stared at him like she was looking at a stranger. Marco felt his heart break again. He took a slow breath and said, I'm sorry. Lily's lips pressed together. She didn't answer immediately. Marco continued, his voice shaking. I was drunk. I was hurt. I wasn't thinking. I swear to you, Lily, it wasn't. Lily lifted her hand. Stop, she said. Her voice was calm, but it was firm. Marco stopped speaking. Lily took a deep breath, as if she was trying to control her emotions. Then she said, I know it wasn't romantic. Marco flinched at the words, even though they were meant to calm him. Lily continued, I know you weren't trying to be sick. I know you weren't looking at me like a woman. Marco's eyes filled with tears, but he forced them back. Lily looked down for a second and then looked back at him. But you still crossed a line, she said. And you did it in public. Do you understand what that did to me? Marco nodded quickly. Yes, he whispered. I understand. Lily's voice grew sharper. No, Marco. I don't think you do, she said. Because it wasn't just a mistake. It was humiliation. It was people staring at me, recording me, whispering about me. It was reporters calling my hospital this morning asking if I'm really your sister. Marco's face turned pale. They called your hospital? He asked. Lily nodded. Yes, she said. And do you know what my coworkers asked me? They asked if I was okay. They asked if I needed help. Some looked at me with pity. Some looked at me with disgust. Lily's voice trembled slightly. I work hard to be respected. I work hard to be normal. And in one stupid moment, you turned me into a scandal. Marco's chest felt like it was being crushed. Lily, I'm so sorry, he said again. But Lily shook her head. Sorry doesn't clean this, she replied. Sorry doesn't delete the video. Sorry doesn't stop people from talking. Marco looked down, ashamed. Lily's voice softened slightly, but her words were still painful. You don't get to use me as your emotional support when your life falls apart, she said. I'm your sister, Marco. Not your shield. Not your comfort toy. Not your replacement for Ava. Marco's eyes widened because the truth hit him hard. That was exactly what he had done. Not because he wanted Lily in a romantic way, but because he wanted comfort, and he grabbed it without thinking. Marco nodded slowly. You're right, he whispered. You're completely right. They stood in silence for a moment. Marco wanted to beg her to forgive him. He wanted to promise her everything. He wanted to say he would punish anyone who talked about her. But he knew threats would only make things worse. Lily didn't need violence. She needed respect. Finally, Lily spoke again. Marco, she said quietly, you need help. Marco looked up. Lily's eyes were serious. Not mafia help, she said. Not money. Not threats. Real help. Therapy. Counseling. Something. Marco almost laughed because the idea sounded impossible. A mafia boss sitting in a therapist's office talking about feelings? Felt like a joke. But then Marco remembered last night. He remembered how he lost control. He remembered the look on Lily's face. He remembered the cameras. And suddenly, therapy didn't sound ridiculous. It sounded necessary. Marco nodded slowly. I'll do it, he said. Lily didn't relax. Promise? She asked. Marco's voice was quiet but firm. I promise, he said. Lily's eyes filled again, but she blinked the tears away. She stepped back slightly, still not inviting him inside but not closing the door either. That small gesture felt like a tiny chance. Marco understood it clearly. She wasn't forgiving him yet, but she wasn't completely cutting him off. Marco left Lily's apartment feeling smaller than he had ever felt. Back in the car, Grace watched him. She asked softly, Did she talk to you? Marco nodded. Yes, he said. Grace waited. Marco stared out the window and said, She told me I need help. Grace didn't look surprised. She's right, Grace said simply. Marco closed his eyes. For once he didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He didn't blame alcohol, Ava, or stress. He knew the truth. He had been living for years like a man who believed power was enough. But power did not teach him how to handle pain. Power did not teach him how to love without destroying. And power did not stop him from hurting the one person who had stood by him. A few days later, Marco did something no one expected. He didn't hide. He didn't threaten the media. He didn't send men to silence witnesses. Instead, he called a lawyer, a public relations advisor, and Grace. He sat in his office looking exhausted and said, I'm going to apologize. Grace studied him carefully. Publicly? She asked. Marco nodded. Grace hesitated because she knew how dangerous it was for a man like Marco to show weakness. But she also knew this was the only way forward. Marco recorded a short statement. He didn't cry. He didn't beg. He simply said the truth. He said, I was drunk. I was grieving my breakup. I acted wrongly. My sister deserved respect. I'm getting professional help. I apologize to her and to everyone who was present. The statement shocked the city. Some people mocked him. Some didn't believe him. Some still hated him. But others quietly respected the honesty. Lily watched the statement alone in her apartment. She didn't smile. She didn't suddenly forgive him. But for the first time since the party, she didn't feel like she was carrying the shame alone. She saw her brother take responsibility. That mattered. Later that night, Marco's phone buzzed. It was a message from Lily. It was short. It said, I saw it. Thank you. Marco stared at the screen for a long time, his eyes burning. He didn't deserve her kindness, but he needed it. He replied, I will do better. I swear. Lily didn't answer again, but Marco felt something he hadn't felt in days. Hope. Marco still had enemies. He still had a dangerous life. The scandal still existed. But now he understood something important. The biggest danger was not always outside. Sometimes, the most dangerous thing in a man's life was the part of him he refused to face. And Marco finally realized that if he didn't change, he would lose more than a girlfriend, more than a reputation, more than respect. He would lose himself completely.